I love listening to music. I love a lot of different kinds of music. Some of my favorites range from John Mayer to Queen, from George Strait to Eric Clapton, from Mozart even to Nelly. Only the clean songs, of course, but I do like a little bit of rap. I love music. And many of my favorite songs, I've come to realize, are songs that I could not stand when I was younger. Right? Songs that while I wanted to be listening to 94.5, my dad was making me listen to 99.9, right? The old stuff. And one of those songs that I didn't care much for when I was younger, but I grew to love, is by Steve Winwood, a song called Higher Love. I know you know it, so I'm not going to sing it to you. But the refrain, right, the lyrics of the chorus are, "Bring me a higher love." He sings it 3 times. And then he says, "Where's that higher love that I keep thinking of?" And I think that these are good lyrics for us as we reflect on today's gospel. Hopefully by the end of the homily, you'll think so too. Last week I preached on how the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' plan for discipleship, right? We've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, and he's laying out what he is going to ask of those who are called to follow him. And the rules, right, the plan that he is laying out, I said last week, is even more difficult than what he instructed the people to do in the Old Testament. Right? And we saw that they couldn't do what he had told them to do in the Old Testament, but he's calling them to something even more demanding. Especially last week in the readings, right? We heard in the Old Testament reading, God was telling them to be holy because he is holy. And in the gospel, Jesus says, "Be perfect because I am perfect." Jesus is calling us to be lifted up. He's calling us to something even greater than what he called the people of the Old Testament to. But he also promises us that he is going to give us more help. Right? That he's going to give us, as I mentioned last week, that new law of grace. Right? The grace of God. God living out that very holiness within us. And he's doing the same today. Right? He's calling us to something higher. Right? Jesus knows that we are immersed in the day-to-day. That so often we get caught up in just the routine things of life. And he knows that those things can make us anxious. Right? We're anxious about a bunch of things. We're anxious about either getting a job or maybe keeping a job. We're anxious about making money so that we can buy things that we need. Right? Food and clothes and fees for school, so that we can pay for our hobbies and maybe even take a vacation. And so it's not bad for us, right, to, in a sense, worry about these things. We can't simply sit around and just expect everything to be taken care of for us. Right? We have to work for the things that we need. But Jesus is telling us today that we shouldn't be consumed with worrying about these things. We shouldn't be consumed with what we need for today. There's something else that's more important than even our basic necessities. Now, not worrying about food or clothing, that's fine, right? We understand that to a certain degree. But if we pay attention to the gospel, Jesus is asking us of something much more challenging than just not worrying about things. Right? He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or your body, or what you will wear." We are not even supposed to worry about our life. Right? Jesus is trying to get us to dig deeper. One writer gets to the heart of it when he writes, "Worry over food, drink, and clothing becomes fallen man's substitute for concern over his soul's salvation." Right? Food and clothing and all those things are meant to give us physical life. But even the preservation of that life can at times hinder us from loving God. Not worrying about our life is shocking to us at first, or it should be. But when we accept it, we gain a sense of freedom. And we see this in the saints. We see it especially in the martyrs, that they came to be indifferent as to whether they lived or they died. Right? St. Paul had this great longing to be with God, but he said, if you want me to stay here, that's fine. If you want me to come and be with you, that's fine too. Right? There's holy indifference as to what happens to us. And they gained this attitude. They gained this acceptance of their mortality because they understood what came after this life. They knew that this life didn't last forever, and that after they died, they would see God. It's only by dying that they would achieve that goal that they were really striving for. But what is it that allowed the saints to stop worrying about their own life? What is it that allowed them to stop worrying about earthly things? That same author says this: healing and salvation, genuine liberation in a Christian sense, lie in our soul's radical conversion to God, in our spirit's turning away from concern with itself toward the contemplation of the divine order. It was in their time of prayer that they were able to be freed of their worries about this world. It was in their contemplative attitude that they were able to stop worrying about the things of the earth, and that they were able to remain focused on God. And so this is what we must do. If we want to stop worrying about every little thing, and if we want to enjoy that freedom that comes to the children of God, then we must spend time in prayer. And that doesn't just mean I'm in a pinch and I say, God, help me with this. Right? That's a good thing. We ought to do that because we believe that God cares about us. But we have to spend time contemplating the divine. Right? That's not something maybe that we think about all that often. And in describing that contemplation of the divine, in describing contemplative prayer, right, the Catechism quotes one of the great saints of the Church, St. Teresa of Avila. And she said this. She said, contemplative prayer, in my own opinion, is nothing else than a close sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us. Right? When we hear contemplative prayer, when I hear contemplative prayer, I start to get worried. Right? I don't know how to do that. I'm not holy enough to be a contemplative. But if we listen to this definition, we can all do it. A close sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us. Right? Contemplative prayer is as easy as going to the Adoration Chapel and just being there. Simply being there with the one who loves us. One meaning of the Latin word that we get our word contemplation from is to look at, right? To gaze attentively at something. And so contemplation is a gaze of faith. Right? It's looking at Jesus. It's being immersed in Him. And so to overcome our attraction to things, we have to spend time in wonder at something greater. We have to spend time looking at Jesus. St. John Vianney once responded to a question about what he does whenever he prays by saying this. He said, I look at Him and He looks at me. There are so many quotes about prayer from the saints that give me a lot of comfort. And this is one of them. Because when I'm sitting there and I find that I'm not doing anything, I remember this. Right? Prayer is not always about doing. It's about being with the one that you love. It's about looking at him and letting him look at you. Contemplation is looking at the one that we love and allowing him to do the same. So all of us have that same yearning as Steve Winwood back in 1986. We all crave a higher love. We all desire the highest love. And that highest love can only be fulfilled by God, who St. John tells us is love. So worry and anxiety is most likely going to be part of our lives forever, in one way or another. But we can do something about it. The more we focus on things that are above us, the more we focus on those higher things, the less that worry and that anxiety about everything can get to us, the less it rules us. The more we spend time contemplating the divine, the less we'll worry about what we're going to eat or drink. The less we're going to worry about what we're going to wear. The less we're going to worry even about our very life. And this is a major reason why, during the season of Lent, we are called to give up certain things. Why we give up things that aren't even necessarily bad for us. But we give them up so that they don't distract us from searching for, from seeking out that higher love that we all desire. And so by spending time every single day in silent prayer, in that contemplative prayer, we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, like the gospel tells us. And Jesus assures us in the gospel today that if we do that, if we spend that time in prayer seeking out God, then he will provide everything that is necessary for our salvation.